Alessandro Camis, and I'm here to introduce our last but not least keynote speaker, Professor Giuseppe Strappa. Giuseppe Strappa is an Italian, or it's better say Roman, architect, and he's currently senior professor at Faculty of Architecture of Sapienza University of Rome. He taught for decades architectural and urban design and also urban morphology, actually since 1980 in Bari Polytechnic School of Architecture before, and then in Sapienza University of Rome. In the last academic year, he held a semester course of Morphologie et Syntaxe des Milieux Bâtis at the Laval University in Quebec City in Canada. He is currently president of the Scientific Association of Urban Morphology, ISUF Italy, and committee member of ISUF International, editor of Urban Forum and Design, a journal of which you have one copy on the desk out there, published in Rome by Erma of Brett Schneider, and he's also a member of the editorial board of that same journal. He is director of the series of books Lettura e Progetto, published by Franco Angeli in Milano. And also, as I said, member of the scientific board of ISUF International Seminar on Urban Form. But as an architectural designer, he obtained awards in many international competitions such as Piazza Cairoli in Rome, Piazza in Ponza in Ventotene, Piazza Mastai in Rome, New Cemetery in Terni, and in Laurentino in Rome, Piazza at Castel Sant'Angelo, Piazza Oberdam in Sabaudia, the Aguzzano Park in Rome, and the Civic Center in Carezzano. So he's a square designer, piazza, public space anyhow. Finally, within his most recent publications, I would like to mention the book he is editor of, Observation on Urban Growth, published by Franco Angeli, Milano, in 2018. And finally, the Urban Morphology and Historical Fabrics, Contemporary Design of Small Towns in Lazio, which he published together with Paolo Carlotti and myself, published in 2016 in Rome by Gangemi, of which there is one copy in vision on the desk outside there. Finally, today, he will lecture for his keynote speech about urban substrata, the ideas of assembly and aggregation in interpreting the ancient city. So please, Professor Strappa, you're welcome to stand on the stage. Thank you.
So, good afternoon. Thank you, Alessandro, for this generous presentation. The title of this conference, City as Assemblage, suggested me some consideration that I would like to share with you. The term assemblage in the modern tradition is not a neutral one. It indicates in general the act of assembling a collection of independent things In the Oxford Dictionary, it also means a work of art made by grouping together found or unrelated objects. The definition indicates in architecture the gathering of different autonomous elements at different scales, having directly to do with the architectural composition. Its study, therefore, poses ontological problems as it concerns the fundamental of design discipline. In the past, it would have been said that composition has the purpose of linking the elements into unity. Today, this statement seems far from obvious. Indeed, one of the characters of contemporary culture seems to be just the impossibility of a synthesis, of bringing the diversity of built reality to unity. However, if we look without prejudice to the history of our city, we realize that even in the past, different interpretations have been given. We could even distinguish over time two ways of conceiving the urban composition. On the one hand, as assemblage, gathering of autonomous parts. On the other hand, aggregation of parts linked by a relationship of necessity whose form is subordinated to a law of proportion and congruence. This duality concerns both the reading of the city and its production, being the terms connected to the society that generates them. This is what I will try to demonstrate, making use of an extreme acception of the two terms and taking account how they are complementary, giving rise to intermediate form of reading and design. I will use in this demonstration the case of density city, especially Rome, just because from Rome, I think many of modern theories about modern architecture have been generated. Think, for example, the one by Louis Kahn, by Colin Rowe, by Muratori itself, Robert Venturi, and so on. So, to give the concrete idea of the problem, we can observe how two different ways of reading the ancient city are evident since the first experiments of cartographers who tried to reconstruct the original form of Rome. To give a morphological order to the different reading, we can establish a dyad of opposite terms by pointing to an extreme the idea of autonomous forms gathered without a common structure, and to the other extreme the idea of a form composed by parts necessary to each other, an organic aggregation of complementary forms in a unitary organism. Considering also the intermediate form of composition, we could fix an indicative scheme of the different mode of reading derived from the Muratorian method. You see here. At an extreme, the irregular serial, at the other extreme, the total organic, an organic aggregation of complementary form in unitary organism, and the intermediate one, the systematic serial, and the episodic organic, one composition of autonomous form made by inordered series, and the other aggregation of serial forms in organic structure. We must say, give a definition, Muratorian definition of serial. A structure is serial when an element of the structure can be removed or substituted without changing the character of the whole structure. This is the definition. By ordering things in this way, we realize that the terms of the progression do not characterize historical phases, but are synchronic. You see, for example, in this plan, by the geographer and cartographer Sebastian Münster, a German cartographer and cosmographer, drawn in 1538, how this map is completely serial. There are parts of the city which are considered like an object, and they are not linked by any relationship or necessity. Even the bridge don't buy any roads, there is no tissue, and even the city wall, they haven't got any gateway. In other reconstruction of ancient Rome, it's possible to recognize instead a unifying thought that ordered the element within a general order. The three drawings of ancient Rome by the physician and cartographer Fabio Calvo in 1527 are an extraordinary example of coincidence of reading and design. The reconstructions were drawn down the year of the sack of Rome, in which Calvo was killed, and they are probably linked to the project of Pope Leo X, who in 19 had commissioned Raffaello to design a plan of ancient Rome. The three drawings, which we will see, are a true formative process for phases of progressive organicity, based on successive doubling in the structure from 4, 8, 16, from the original square Rome to the octagonal Rome of King Servius Tullius to the imperial Rome. You see the first one is the square Rome, is a drawing which interprets the Plinius might reported on the foundation of Rome. Romulus with the plough has made the ancient Rome, and you see, like in this case, the inside, the part inside the gateway and the city wall, they are objects, each one with its own logic, each one with a temple, the Jupiter temple, the Mars temple, and here the other temples of Rhea Silva and of Juno. So the male gods are here, the female here, in the axis, in the counter axis. So this is the first one of the series. The second one, you see, is a progression of organicity, is a polygonal with 8 sides, in which it starts a certain, we have steel element, objects, which are all arranged around a center, which is the umbilicus urbis, the navel of the city. So it's a progression of organicity from 4, 8, ending with the imperial Rome, which concluded the series, and again is based on a double number of parts compared with the previous one, 16 sides, and the structure consists of region according to ancient administrative division of Rome, each was a repeatable form, each with its own monument and door. All the structure is organically arranged around the Millennium Aureum, which is the center. It was not just the center of the city, but the center of the empire. It's the golden milestone from which all the city of the empire, they were measured. And you see how everything is organic. You can't take out one piece of the structure without changing the character of the whole structure. So we see here 16 parts of the ancient Rome, but it looked like if Fabio Calvo made a mistake, because really, I haven't found in literature this, but really the number of the region regions which Augustus established in 20 before Christ were not 16, were 14. And so Fabio Calvo has made a mistake. It's very strange. I say it's impossible. Fabio Calvo was a very cultivated person, which has got a humanistic formation. So it's impossible that he hasn't known this aspect of the structure. He added two sectors, two regions, the Vatican and Campus Martius Major, because this is not the work of a cartographer. It's the work of reading the city, producing something which was, I say, proposed as a cartography, but really is a project, is a design. Is the design of an ideal city. You see the comparison. See here Francesco Di Giorgio Martini, one of the many ideal cities which were drawn in that period, and has 16 sites. And look at Sforzinda, which was produced by Filarete many years before, but has got just the same shape. 16 parts, all around the center, and the center is a special, in this case, is the specialized building. It's the pole of all the composition, but it's a composition of an architect, proving as the Fabio Calvo's one was not the design of a cartographer, is at the same time a reading and design. See here the case of Palmanova, which is a city built on this idea of ideal city, which has got the same character. It's a structure all organized organically around the center, which is in this case a square. It was designed by Savorgnan in 1593, and you see the same Savorgnan has designed the city wall of Cyprus, of Nicosia, sorry. And it would be interesting to compare the two plans, which are 25-year distance, with the scheme, the moratorian scheme. We have no time, but it's very easy to put this in the frame. No? This one it's a city wall with a serial structure inside, just a fortification. This one is a walled city in which everything is organic. With the plan of an ideal city. So the idea of using an organic structure, an abstract and organic structure to build a city is also interpreted in the contrary sense as the ideal city which starts with the real matter of the fabric. In this case, look these drawings by Antonio da Sangallo, the Young, 1537. This is a drawing in which there were a substrata of road, the Via Lata and the actual Via del Babuino. There were just few Roman remains to which Sangallo gave an order. After was built in 1543 Via del Babuino, symmetrical, and you can see easily, for who know the Muratorian theory, those are matrix road in which is built the building road orthogonally, and all these angles are 22.5 degrees, which is just the angle of a polygonal of 16 sides. So the result is this one. It's the beginning of a kind of ideal city in which all the road, pre-existing road, they are employed as matter to produce a kind of ideal, possible future city. So it's evident that from the beginning of the reconstruction of the ancient Rome, two different readings are opposed. One based on perception as collection of elements, the other as recognition of a general and abstract law corresponding to a regularity wheel. Before examining the problem of the modern reading of ancient Rome, I think it's useful to provide a morphological definition of the terms of the dyad assembly and aggregation, specifying the meaning in urban morphology studies. Note that in the ISUF glossary, the terms are not even reported. The meaning we will attribute to the terms is conventional, of course. In fact, each discipline attributes instrumentally different meaning to those terms. Assemblage, from the late 15th century French assemblance, is the act of gathering in the literal sense of put together. The specific meaning we attribute for our purpose is that of composition made by generically grouping together elements in a loose way, not closely set in a common general structure. Corresponding modern terms are bricolage, patchwork, miscellany, mixture, assortment, mélange, pastiche, agglomerate, montage, and so on. They are, as we can see, terms used in some modern artistic technique, informal, by the way, and borrowed by architecture. In this framework, it's especially important, as we will see, the term collage, a pictorial technique adopted in the 19th century by avant-garde artists, consisting in assembling material on a common support. In the 19th century, avant-garde used this technique quite frequently, and it was widespread in the idea of contemporary architecture. If you think, for example, of a personality like Colin Rowe, which has proposed this kind of assembly by elements. In this case, the notion of process is completely lacking, and is defined in this term: the assembly is unpredictable. Knowing some parts is not possible to read the whole because it does identify any regularity law. Aggregation is an organized collection obtained by the conjunction of particular elements to form a whole. The late Middle English term derives from the Latin aggregatum, shepherd together, from ad, towards, and gregen, flock, so to unite with a constituted group. In morphology, the term plays a central role in the Muratorian school. In this context, the observation by Paolo Maretto, introducing the notion of relational modalities, is of particular interest. What allowed the historical city to transform a plurality into an aggregative unity, Maretto says, is the structurally open character of the urban building type, its intrinsic associative valencies that allow it to make a system with other similar types. The composition is thus referred to a paradigm of the process and the transformation of the architecture and urban form in space, time, and phases. The aggregation is partially predictable. Knowing some parts, it's possible to reconstruct the structure, the whole, to redesign it. Note the affinity with the linguistic, where the notion of predictability is the tool with which the greater or lesser structuring of a sentence is considered. In architecture, it is obvious. In a classical temple, the general shape can be perfectly reconstructed, knowing some elements. In a contemporary architecture, this generally is almost impossible. A very evident example of reading ancient Rome as an assembly of pre-formed elements is the work by Giovan Battista Piranesi. The informal reconstruction of its Campo Marzio is in fact a modern city. It's the beginning of the crisis of the urban project as a concluded form. That of Piranesi is a city analogous to the real one, to which the discovery of ever new parts of the Forma Urbis, the marble map placed in the Temple of Peace at the beginning of the 3rd century, certainly contributed. You see here a drawing of the Forma Urbis in which Piranesi reported all the fragments which crowd mysterious and enigmatic around the uncontaminated nature of the future Rome, and they seem to wait to be arranged like in a puzzle. Each part, each element is different from the other, and they must fit inside in the nature. Piranesi ancient Rome is composed of autonomous elements, each with its own orientation and each one with its own internal structure. In his reconstruction of Campo Marzio, in fact, nothing seems to remain of the many survives carefully carried out together with Scottish architect Robben Adam by Piranesi. Indeed, the design seems the result of an intellectual work almost independent of the real city, in evident controversy with the accurate plan that Giovan Battista Nolli has produced some years before, 6 years before, if I remember well, and which has got an enormous success in all Europe. As Manfredo Tafuri notes, the structures of the most famous monuments, the one connected with the reality and that determine the shape of the real urban layout, the Mausoleum of Hadrian, the Pantheon, the Theatre of Marcellus, are arbitrarily traced to minor episodes. According to a method that will be extensively reused by the architect of the second half of the 20th century, the ancient city is a text open to all interpretation, even extreme ones, to which one can freely approach with the only instrument of perception. Piranesi's Campo Marzio is a miscellaneous composition, a collage of autonomous and self-sufficient objects. Sia a model in 3 dimensions of the plan of Piranesi, and you see how it resembles to the Louis Kahn Dhaka Assembly Hall. Piranesi marks the beginning of the intentional dissolution of the form. Indeed, it systematically and polemically lacking in everything that gives a structure to a fabric. It lacks, for example, of the roots, which is the core of any fabric, the solidarity between the root and the building, the hierarchy between the different elements, which give meaning and sense to the city, the formation of poles and nodes, which is the core of the orientation of the structure in the city, and the lack of housing. There is no fabric. It's a city of monument. This is quite remarkable because it gives rise to an idea of Rome as a city of monuments. And we will see here how in the 19th century the reading of the city, composed of autonomous parts, generates the idea of freeing the monument to isolate them by demolishing the fabric that they themselves has generated. It is at the origin of phenomenon systematically carried on, as in the 5 years of Napoleonic administration. In this period, all the urban projects, they were drawn as two cities. One city is the city of the monuments, and the other city is the monument, is the modern city in which the antiquity is the embellishment of the city. So one is the city of the monument, the other is the modern city in which the monument is or the antiquity as just employed as embellishment. To embellish Rome, it's more a question of destroying than to building, wrote Pietro Piranesi, another son of Gian Battista Piranesi, in a letter to the Minister of the Interior of 1810. It's also known as in the interwar period, the idea of freeing the monuments was a part of the rhetoric of the regime and produced some distraction inside the urban fabric of Rome. Piranesi's Rome had an extraordinary fashion among the architects of the second half of the 20th century, indicating a way to read the city by parts. The periodic rediscovery of its relevance confirms how the impossibility of a total conception of the urban organism is at the center of much contemporary thought. The most obvious air of the Piranesian adventure is surely Colin Rowe's Collage City, 1978, which has been the reference for a generation of architects. It introduced to the idea of the contemporary city, read and designed in fragments, as a form open to any interpretation. It is an expression of the postmodern cultural context in which, in the wake of Friedrich Nietzsche nihilist thought, there are no true but only interpretation. Like Saverio Muratori, Colin Rowe believed in the identity between reading and design. He noted that the contemporary city is a collage of struggling forms and drew the consequences. If this is the situation, he writes, if the only outcome to be sought is collision of interest, then why should this dialectical predicament be not just as much accepted in theory as in practice? Collage City is an open collection, derived from the isolated and individual understanding of the phenomenon. The unifying thought, Colin Rowe says, is anti-modern. It expressed in extreme form by the many utopias that have occurred over time, starting with the Utopia by Thomas More, which in 1516 used the term for the first time. And modern urban utopias are abstractions from the ideal cities of the Italian Renaissance to those of Wright and Le Corbusier. Rowe also established a dyad of positive form, a city composed in an open way, as in a bricolage, and an ethical city produced by abstract plans destined to fail, governed by rigid rules through which the elements are composed in a unitary way. On the one hand, ancient Rome, as in interpreted by Piranesi, illustrating something, he says, of the bricolage mentality at its most lavish. On the other, Filarete's Sforzinda, the city of aggregation where the parts bind together to form a unitary organism. For Rome, even in Baroque times, is a city of building and urban spaces in conflict, autonomous composition with staff and his word in the middle. It is a coalition of palaces, squares, and villas, he says, that inextricable fusion of imposition and accommodation that was highly successful and resilient. But beware, Imperial Rome, Rome tells us, is not only the symbol of an assembly by parts, where monuments, the forum, the baths, lie side by side with our rules. All interpretations are indeed possible. On closer inspection, the object could also have links between them, depending on the reading angle. Ancient Rome is a city with multiple interpretations. And Alto Rossi has also ended joining the postmodern idea of reading built reality in this way, invited to comment on his architectural bricolage exhibited at the Venice Biennale in 1976, entitled The Analogous City, he writes, everybody can rediscover himself in fixed and rational elements in his own history. The historical reference is no doubt the Canaletto's Analogous Venice, in which some of the Palladio design were assembled freely on the canal. The method that Rowe proposed is the multiple interpretation of the reality. The objects found, extracted from the contents of the original meaning, and recomposed according to a personal urban vision. The ideal centerpiece in Collage City is the bull head by Pablo Picasso from 1943. The painter's comment on his own work is also, at the same time, an immediate explanation of Rowe's thought, as in an interview written by André Vournot in 1945, he says, "Do you remember the bull's head I exposed recently? Here is how I conceived it. I had noticed in a corner a handlebar and a bicycle saddle, arranged in such a way that they looked like a bull's head. I put these two objects together in a certain way. In short, I made the handlebar and saddle a bull's head that everyone recognized as such. The metamorphosis was accomplished, and I hope that another metamorphosis will be carried out in the opposite direction. Suppose my bull's head is thrown in the wreckage. One day, maybe, a boy, seeing it, will say, here is something that could serve very well as a handlebar for my bicycle. Thus, a double metamorphosis we have been accomplished." I think that Saverio Muratori is that boy who finds the bicycle and the bar and brings being back to the real meaning, where everything is independent and conflictual in the city of Rome, everything ends up binding in the fabric of Muratori, where true is not given For the first, everything is explained and demonstrated for the second. Art, like architecture, and even the city and the territory are not just individual creation, it is the shared synthesis that concludes the process. Muratori's one is an utopian vision, but not an abstraction. Muratori well knows that the territory, the city, the modern fabrics have lost all their organic character, but he proposed an indication to change, which is also the sense of utopia by Thomas More, who imagined a city without a place, topos in Greek, precisely because it is abstract and so perfect as to be impossible to construct in reality. And yet, in reality, utopia was not simply an impossible and today useless model, according to Colin Rowe interpretation, but a criticism of the English society of the time, of the ranks of the nobility, and of the contradiction of the private property. And the criticism is also the meaning of the ideal cities of the Renaissance, of the Garden City of Owen, of Wright's Broadrake's city. They are the prefiguration of a better world for the life of man. Thus, utopia is a fundamental aspect of Western thought, an aspect of which, incidentally, I would say, it would be good to reflect in a moment of crisis in which architecture passively expresses the value of the dominant culture. Muratori's work on Rome started from the practical need to study medieval neighborhood in the relationship with the new fabrics. However, the need to extend the study soon became clear. The medieval city explained only as a derivation from the pre-existing city, and the ancient one, which thus finished to be only archaeology, to become a phase of the transformation. The study of Rome necessarily became the study of a method. Rome, with the advance of the research, presents itself as an infinite set of aggregation of forms. It potentially contains all the possible phenomena, far more complex than those that are posed to the contemporary urban planning, having to do, for the most part, with linear and serial development. In the introduction to the Storia Operante della città di Roma, Operating History of the City of Rome, Muratori places a short chapter entitled The Problem Rome as a Method Problem. I think that is one of the most interesting things written by Muratori. He writes, but it soon appeared that it was not a sample of heterogeneous elements put together in an order merely corresponding to different physical cases, but of the results of a precise historical process, spatially incisive and broad in extension, density, and individual historical development, according to a progressive process of integration and differentiation of needs and structure, with an increasingly marked qualification of individual value, both of elements and of the entire urban environment, so that each element always drew new validation, a characterization of its original structure as the new increase were multiplied. So gradually the study of Rome is reversed. In time it becomes, in some way, from the study of the city that requires a method to the study of a method and the theory that govern it, of which the city is together the exemplification and the verification. In the wake of the many reconstructions produced in the past, even the ancient Rome of Muratori is a Rome based all in part on evidence, on documentation, and therefore, in some way, it should be noted, is a project, is a design. The huge gaps of the documentation are filled by following a general law recognized in ancient organisms. Look, for example, the reconstruction of ancient Rome, the imperial Rome, in the north part of Trastevere. There are no evidences, archaeological evidences, in this part of Rome. Of course, there is the traces of the ancient road, Aurelia Vetera, and the bridge and the area of Santa Maria in Trastevere, but only remain there were from the bridge and here the barracks of the fire brigade. That's all. So all the design that Muratori has done here is in some way an invention. But note, please, the difference from the reconstruction of Piranesi, Colin Road. Here is a language which has got a rule. When you have a language with a rule, and for example, you have some phrases in which you don't have some words, it's possible to make hypotheses on these words, which are not sure. You are not sure that the words are exactly that, but there is a range inside which the words must be founded. So it's the same. His theory is the theory of matrix road, building road, connecting road, and he has no the type of insula which he has repeated here. So all the reconstruction is at the same time a reconstruction of ancient Rome and the proposing of theory of reading the city and designing the city. So this is a map by Rodolfo Lanciani. Rodolfo Lanciani has made a collection of all the excavation made in Rome in the 18th century, and you see that all the evidence are the Aurelia Vetus, some traces here, and the traces of Ponce Emilius. So Muratori has designed everything starting from a theory of architecture. From the overlapping of the different formative phases, it becomes evident how the present fabric is the product of an organic transformation that ancient remains demonstrate. So the ancient is useful to understand the new formation of the fabric, but the fabric allows us also to understand the origin of the substrata. For this reason, the shape of the city, that as product of an organic aggregation of elements, is not a confused and unpredictable magma. It is predictable in the same way that in an organically structured sentence, we know how to recognize the synthetic, grammatical, and logical role of the missing words. Those words are part of a whole. They are necessary. So Muratori studied the ancient city for overlapping, you see here, of different phases, which most of them they are proved. They are really also with successive excavation, they prove the correct interpretation of Muratori. When Muratori studied the ancient city, we could say, as the structure of a language. We must study Latin, he seems to say, not because we need to speak a dead language, but because we need to understand its formation and composition in such a way as to use it today with good grasp. This beliefs in a climate of intellectual liberalism, of the years in which Muratori proposed this method sounded like a blasphemy. It is still difficult to accept them today. Of course, while Conil Rowe was the expression of his time, Muratori was an outdated and almost lonely thinker and architect. He was a man of the past, but following his cyclical vision of history and also looking at the actual condition of architecture, is also a man of the future. My point of view about the matter is that in a reading of the ancient city useful to contemporary design, we should abandon the romantic term of ruins and assume the more appropriate term of substratum. Here it's an article I made for the last number of our magazine of ISUF Italy, in which I try to propose a method to study the substrata. It's online, and if someone is interested, he can read it. Dissimilar from a ruin, from the Latin ruere, to collapse, a substratum from substernere, to spread beneath, is recognized as a beginning, the living basis from which new organisms can spring. Substratum is the layer underneath the current built environment that has changed or lost its functional purpose in time, but nevertheless contribute to the life of new buildings and fabrics. We can extend this meaning behind the ancient city. From this point of view, the new broad sense that its definition involves is that every construction at any scale is an invention, intended in the literal etymological meaning of invenire. It's a finding. It follows that any fabric is in some way a reconstruction and any building a rediscovery. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Strappa, for your keynote lecture on substrata. Given the time, we might take only two.